We are back. We're continuing on with Laozi, Daoism, the Tao Te Ching. And before I give you the context, now we'll start pointing to exact passages. So let me get my book out. Okay, let's just start with section 1. I've already said some things that the introduction says, so let's start with the actual reading. I know you're very excited. The actual reading. Section 1. Okay. In section 1, we see something that's called mysticism, usually. You see where it says, nameless is the mystery, unnameable is the essence. So what Daoism is saying here is that the most important thing, or the core essence of things, is unnameable. And for something to be unnameable must mean partly that it's well, leave that aside. The unnameable thing is sort of a mystery, a mystical mystery. Okay. In Daoism, the deepest truths are the hard to know or express in very concrete, specific, exact terms. Okay. Now, once more, I would love it if your mind immediately jumps to a possible objection. Objections are not always just, oh, I don't like this idea, or I think it's false, I'm going to shut it down. Objections, good objections, are always, wait, if the reading says A, B, C, well, the next step is D, or it makes my mind think of this connected idea D, wait a second, right? So in philosophy, when you object to something, you're really just extending the consequences of an idea further along its same tracks. It's actually deeply respectful in philosophy to know an idea well enough that you can object to it or raise a tough question for it. Okay? So a possible objection, tough question that doesn't deny the truth of this, but says, well, if what you say is true, I see a potential problem or objection I should raise, is this. If you're saying in a book about the Tao that saying and naming it are impossible or don't capture it, you're basically saying the whole book is pointless. That's a possible objection. But then look, there's not just the one section, right? The Tao Te Ching book does not stop there. It keeps going and it keeps on possibly naming the Tao. Okay? So what we'll say is we will just leave that open as a possible objection. And one of the things I want to say is just point back to the context I gave a little bit ago. That something is not fully nameable doesn't mean it can't be named partially. That something is not entirely knowable doesn't mean it's impossible for me to point to it. So I used a bunch of double negatives there. Let me put it this way. It's still possible for me to point you to something unnameable, and you're looking at it when I point to it might still give you some of what it's got. So maybe the Tao Te Ching book doesn't tell you what Daoism is, like a snapshot picture, but points you towards it so that you can understand it yourself. Instead of me trying to scoop it all up and write it down and then forcing that word on you, maybe I just use the words to turn your head toward the Tao so you can look at the Tao or the way and understand it for yourself. Okay? So that's one possible way to deal with this possible objection. Okay? It's a mystery, but it's not insanity. There's something that can be known or felt about the mystery, even if we can't write it down. Okay. As I said, that a general philosophy term for something like this would be mysticism. When there's something that you can sort of know, but that the individual has to intuit her or himself. When big ideas sort of stay one step ahead of us, always drawing us along the way toward the big idea, but always staying one step ahead of us, that can be called mysticism. Okay. So Something else involved in this and the whole rest of the book is a linguistic component. Linguistic just means of language, okay? Daoism in general seems to say that the deepest truths are the hardest truths to write about. However, there might still be a way where saying them or thinking them or feeling them in your gut might still attach you to the truth. I'll say some more about this later, okay? But if we think about it even in this early stage, that if the Tao is partly the flow of the universe, I can't necessarily name or know every aspect of the flow of the universe. But the universe knows, right? The universe knows without saying, without writing in Chinese or in English. It knows without naming how to flow. Okay? So even if there might be a block for humans in words, there's not a block in doing the flow. Humans can still do the flow of the natural universe. And if you're doing it, who cares if you can name it with words? Okay? So again, that's a linguistic point because it's saying words might be different than doing. Words might be a block to knowing sometimes. And those are just interesting. Those are very Philosophy 100 big, interesting ideas. Okay. Another important point about Daoism, which reveals to us something about philosophy more generally, is that Daoism is what's called a monism. M-O-N-I-S-M. Monism just basically means oneism, right? A monism is a philosophy of strong unity, okay? This is one of those big metaphysical questions. Is the universe truly one, or is it truly a bunch of different parts? Okay. In Daoism, the universe is definitely one. So Daoism is what's called a monism. It's a philosophy of unity. So we see this in section 2. Section 2 says that there are infinite or 10,000 manifestations or individual things. There's a billion little things, but that the mystery or the oneness of the universe comes from the same source as the infinite manifestations of things. Okay, so individual things are within a total whole or a total universe, but not only are they in it as sort of a container, but they're somehow unified with that overall container as well. Okay, so you can think about it this way. Something like gravity, right? Gravity is a force throughout the whole universe, but it's also in individual things. You don't have a force of gravity unless you have individual things with mass, right? So individual things rolling down a hill because of gravity are somehow both individual and playing in or united with gravity, which operates throughout the whole universe. And gravity needs individual things to be gravity. It needs individual things with mass in order to affect them. So it's a really strong unity, a really strong monism or unity. In section 13, we see more of this monism, where it runs basically, heaven covers, earth supports, and heaven and earth endure. So the idea I get from this section 13 is that everything you as a particular individual manifestation in the universe, everything that you as a particular thing do has an overarching setting that we could call heaven that contextualizes it, okay? And that sort of gives it a meaning. What you do when you volunteer for the homeless, say you are doing some particular action at the soup kitchen, but it's got some kind of overarching context that makes it make sense, right? You want to do charity because of how you were raised as a kid. That brings you to this particular point today. There's some kind of background that gives meaning to what you're doing. And we can think of Earth as supporting. Earth is the sort of necessary support. You literally could not donate your time to the homeless shelter unless there's a ground or earth for you to walk on to get there, to drive on to get there. So even something you do, you say, I'm doing charity, most other people don't. That's about me as an individual. Well, you've got a context that makes it make sense, what you're doing, and you've got sort of a secret ground underneath you that makes it possible to do this thing. So you don't want to say, oh, the universe is actually doing charity, not you. But without the universe and the ground, it would be impossible for you to do this thing. So you are one with the universe at every moment, even when you're doing some very particular manifestation, like moving your hands to hand someone food. Okay? You don't exist in a vacuum, okay? You're not just some brain with eyes attached in a vat floating in empty space, right? Everything you do connects to something, which itself connects to something else, okay? Another thing we can think about the monism of heaven and earth here is that heaven and earth, the sky and the earth, existed before you ever showed up, and they will exist after you die. So you're extended sort of into time when you're connected to heaven and earth because they come before you and go after you. And everything you do is connected to heaven and earth. So everything you do is sort of in the past and in the future connected. Okay? You wouldn't be possible without the past, and the future isn't possible without you in the present. Okay. A little more on monism. And again, that just means unity. We're just trying to show that Daoism is monistic or monism, and trying to understand that as one possible answer in philosophy for what the world is. It's one, according to Daoism. Section 18 says, the Great Mother has 10,000 things. 10,000 just means very, very many infinite things. The Great Mother has infinite things that are all her children. If you know one, if you know the mother, you'll know her children. And if you know the children, you will know the mother. So the point here is that if you know the abstract philosophical stuff like you can find in this book, you will know particular things better. Same, because they're unified so strongly. If you know a particular thing really well, that will sort of tap you into the mother or Tao which helped produce that thing. Okay? Everything's united. If you know little stuff, you'll know big stuff. If you know big stuff, you'll know little stuff. Okay. So all the above is metaphysics, big questions. Specifically, it's monism, a unity. Okay? But philosophy can also use these big metaphysical ideas to help you shape your life. Okay? So the word ethics can mean doing right and avoiding wrong. Ethics is often just a synonym for the word morality. There's another sense of ethics, though. Ethics comes from the ancient Greek word ethos, which we sometimes still use. And so ethics also means a sort of total way of life, a characteristic way of being in the world. And we see that, we sort of derive that from metaphysics. This is one of the reasons it's important to do philosophy, is that even when it's asking what seem like abstract or useless metaphysical questions, most of those metaphysical questions can have some impact and show you a good way of life to pursue. So we see in section 3, the sage acts without forcing. She lets things come and she lets things go. She completes her work or action, then forgets it, but her work lasts forever. That's the end of the quote. Okay? Because work is not only your own, but because it belongs to the universe and is linked to the past and the future, if you do something as an individual, it connects to everything else. It's not your sole responsibility. It also will last forever, everything you do, because it connects to the present and the past. So here's ethics, not in the sense of you're bad if you do this, but ethics in the sense of an ethos as a total way of life, a total view or style on life. If you believe the metaphysics or big ideas of Daoism, you can have this attitude towards your action where you don't force things to be a certain way, but you let them be how they ought to be. You let them arise naturally. Okay? It's just a general attitude you could take into life. Should I force the world to bend to my will? No, that doesn't usually work. What if I let the world be its best possible self? Will that work? Yeah, it's already going to do that. If I let the world do that and tap into it, then I can forget all the stress of chasing down and making things be a certain way. I can just be, and I will be forever like the universe is. Peaceful and calm. Okay. In section 5, we see similarly some of this ethics as an ethos or way of life. It says, what is empty is inexhaustible. You can use it but never fill it up. And you can use it and it never gets used up. Okay? That's some of the kind of way of life you can derive from Daoism if you believe its ideas. So now I'm going to ask the discussion question, okay? The discussion question is this. We see in section 6 and many sections, we see things that are basically saying, try being whole but not being empty. Try to be clear fog, or try to be whole and empty at the same time. Be like the water, be soft so that you can grind down all stones, right? These things that seem paradoxical or contradictory, right? So what I want to ask is, this is the discussion question, very open-ended. When Daoism says these sort of opposite things, be weak or be soft in order to be strong, use things but don't use them up, etc. Does it seem like does it make good sense to you? Does it seem like it's capturing some deep truth? Or does it maybe seem the opposite, somehow false or just contradicting itself? Okay? So it's a general question, but with this sort of sense of paradox, of being and not being, of doing but not forcing action. Do you think it's that Daoism is tapping in here somehow to how things really are? Or is this just sort of an idealist, soft-thinking mishmash of, you know, is it like hippy-dippy, just go with the flow, man? Or is this really getting at something good and maybe a good way to lead? So once more to repeat, and then we'll pause the recording. Do these sort of paradoxical ways of living presented in Daoism, do they make sense to you? Do they seem deeply true to you? Or on the other hand, do they seem maybe empty or false, too squishy, not enough content? Okay? Pause the recording now and think about this, please. Okay, so you paused and you jotted your thoughts down, right? Okay. So let's move on. We'll go on to the next point, which is that even in these sort of squishiest ideas of Daoism, they do still give some support for them. Okay? So if you look at section 6 and especially section 7, you see this idea that it's the hole in the center of the wheel that lets the wheel spin. Right? The outside of a wheel can't spin unless the center is moving. And the center can't be the outside or else it won't be a wheel, right? Now, the cart only moves because of the spinning wheels. So for the cart to move forward, wheels have to spin in a circle without moving forward, or it's a different kind of motion. Okay, a wheel is useless on its own. It's only useful once you put a cart on it. So the cart needs the wheel needs the cart. All these things, these sort of opposites are united. So Daoism would say, I'm not giving false contradictory ideas. And I may not be giving standard philosophical argumentation, but I can point to real things in your real life that you've seen and say, aren't the wheels of the car required for the car? Yes. Wouldn't the car be useless without wheels? Yeah. Wouldn't the wheels be useless without the car? Yeah. Doesn't it take one kind of motion, spinning around an axis, like the wheel does, to give you another kind of motion, not spinning but moving forward? Yeah. So they hint with examples and trust you to check the examples yourself. They say, do you think that life in general is like the wheel and the vehicle? They give you an example and let you think about whether you think it's accurate or not. Okay? And here's one of the most famous images from Daoism. It's exactly the emptiness of the pot that allows the pot to be filled. You get no fullness unless you have emptiness as well. Right? You need these opposites in order for anything to be what it is. It must contain opposites. There's very much a connection here to yin-yang ideas, and I'm just going to float that for now, right now. Okay. So what I'm doing now is partly, I asked a question open-ended, but I'm giving some of what Daoism would say in response. They'd say, I know it seems squishy and hippy-dippy, but in fact we do give some proof or evidence for it, for why it's true. We see something similar in section 8 where it says, look for it and you can't see it. Listen for it and you can't hear it. Speaking of the Tao in general. So the way I think about this is it's a lot like trying to define love. You know this expression, it's about pornography. It's a Supreme Court justice. He said, pornography is hard to define, but you know it when you see it. Okay? I think that's a bit what's going on here with Daoism, and my example is trying to define love. It's really hard to define what love is. Okay? And you can't force yourself to be in love. You can't just go looking for love and guarantee that you will see it or find it. Okay? But when you are in love, when you are doing the practice of love, you go with the flow. Right? And it all just happens naturally. Love happens better than you ever could have planned it when you're in the moment. Think about it. Movies about love, if you're into them, are good. But being in love, so not the movie, what people can say or show about love, what you can hear about love, might be good, but being in love is much better. But you can't make yourself be in love the way you could make a movie be about love. You can't explain why you love the person you're with in the way that you could explain why a character loves someone in a movie. The doing of it is better, but harder to define. Okay, so again, I can't prove to you that Daoism is true, but when I point to examples that you probably have in your own experience, like being like love, the question you're supposed to put to yourself is, have I experienced that before? Does it make sense? And do I think it connects to what Daoism is saying? Okay. Now, remember before I said, when you object to an idea, you can actually do that in a way that's much more respectful of the idea than simply agreeing with it. So here's my respectful, skeptical response. I might say about love, I'd be like, you're right, you can't define love because it's nothing but a surge of bodily chemicals. Science can explain this. Animals have the same chemicals in them. And this bodily animal reaction is irrational. So it can't easily be discussed at the personal level. But we can know it. It's chemistry does this. Evolutionary psychology does this. Okay? So that's one possible sort of hard-headed response, saying, oh buddy, these things are knowable. And the reason they're confusing when someone's in the middle is not because the Tao and the mystery. It's just because you don't have access to the chemicals. You can't know the chemicals in your body like as they're happening. So I hope you can see that there's two very good responses here that go in completely different directions. Okay? What I always want you to do in philosophy is take what they say and understand it. Before you agree or disagree, like or dislike it, just take what they say and understand it. Okay? And then see where else that idea might go. Extend that idea forward. And see when you apply that idea to other things in your life, if it enriches your understanding of your life. And if so, beautiful. But if it somehow doesn't fit with the other experience in your life or seems to falsify something in your life, then maybe you want to pull back and say, I'm going to respectfully, skeptically reply. I'm going to challenge the idea on its own grounds. Okay? Okay. Another thing I want to point out here, and this is less what Daoism exactly would say, but it's more just something, it's a cool idea that you should be exposed to in Philosophy 100. General linguistic points. Once more, these things will, they fit with Daoism, but they're not what Daoism itself says. It's just general ideas that sort of are cousins to what we've been talking about in terms of linguistics or words. Just think about these ideas. The only way you can talk or probably think about a tree is partly by using the word tree. But here's the thing about words. The word tree is general. I can use it to explain every tree in the world. But every actual tree in the world is individual, right? So the word I use to think about trees is general and covers all of them. But whenever I'm talking about a tree, I'm not talking about general treeness or like tree-icity. I'm talking about this tree I can see out the window right now. So that's a weird thing about words. Words are general. The things they try to word about, I was going to say, talk about, are not general but individual. Okay, a second general linguistic point, not exactly Taoist, but it fits with these ideas, is that words are sounds compressed by human lungs and tongues, or written by human hands. They're not made by trees at all. Okay, so again, words are things that come out of our mouths or come off of our hands. The tree didn't make the word tree, right? So there's, again, a sort of gap or disconnect between words and things here. Okay, a third point, general linguistic point is this, is that words don't resemble the things they talk about at all. Most trees have leaves. The word tree doesn't have leaves. It's not shaped like a tree. Okay, so maybe a painting or a picture looks like a tree, but words don't seem to resemble their objects at all. Another way that maybe words are insufficient to know or experience the world. Okay. A fourth point, I'm sure this one will make very clear sense as soon as I say it. You and I probably sometimes use the same word in different ways. Okay. Maybe not the word tree, but the word justice, right? Do you think Black Lives Matter is a justice movement? Or do you think that, say, I don't know, Blue Lives Matter is a true justice movement? Which one is good? Which one is better? We probably use the same word good and better, actually meaning different things by it. Okay? So the same word can be used in different ways. Like, do you call a tomato a vegetable or not? One way of defining it through words says it's a vegetable. Another way of defining it through words says it's a fruit because it has seeds, right? Words can be used in different ways, especially by different people. Okay. Like I said, those are sort of Philosophy 100 ideas. They're not necessarily in or from our reading, but it still backs up our reading when our reading says that words are maybe not the only or best way to know something. Okay. Section 9, I think, is funny. It says, the great do the Tao. The average half try to do the Tao, and the lesser laugh at the Tao. That's why they're lesser, and the Tao is the Tao. I think that's funny. Want to point out something, though, is that you could say this about philosophy generally. Some people see what philosophy is, and they really grab onto it. Some people see it and go, well, it's sort of, I can see something valuable to it, and they sort of dabble in it, or they do half of the assigned readings. And then people who just don't get it just laugh and think it's silly. So that's one way we could approach this section. Another way is this, though, is you could say, well, this is snooty. This is a Taoist saying people who laugh at the Tao just don't get it. And me as a snooty philosopher saying those who don't love their Philosophy 100 class are real jerks, right? It'd be elitist and snooty. But I've read another translation of this section that doesn't say, oh, the if you laugh at Taoism or philosophy, then that proves why you're lesser. The translation came out instead saying that it can only be the Tao, it can only be philosophy if someone is laughing at it, if someone refuses it. Okay? That other translation, instead of being something snooty, was saying, yeah, there is something weird about Taoism, there is something weird about philosophy. And some people, they're not wrong when they think that. They're right when they think that. They just hold on to that. And it wouldn't be the Tao or philosophy if everyone thought it was important and everyone loved it. Right? So instead of saying they're bad because they don't like it, a different translation has it basically as, there is something like that about Taoism, and those people actually get it. And maybe the philosopher doesn't always remember that. You see how with a different translation, you can get very different readings out of it? Okay. Moving on here. Section 11, Section 22, and Section 24, to me, show part of the value of philosophy. There's a real optimism here. In this philosophy, there's a real sense that when you're doing well, Taoism or philosophy generally can be a treasure for you, sort of the crown jewel in your happiness. And that when you're in a bad way, that it can be a refuge, give you hope, give you reason for strength and optimism. That's how I read Section 11. Section 22 and 24 I see as giving a sense of optimism or hope as well. Once more, the value of philosophy or the value of Taoism is that it can give you this sense of seeing the world more brightly. So 22 says, if you're soft and tender, if you're supple and flexible, you won't be beaten down by the wind. You won't be beaten down by bad circumstances, but you will bend in the wind. You will be able to go with the flow. 24, I'll read more of this one later, says that water's the lowest. It goes lower than the earth, but that doesn't mean it's the worst. In its low position, it can do things that other things can't. Okay? To me, this is the kind of thing that when you're doing well, you can say, yes, that gives an extra layer of meaning to my life. That's exactly what's going on here. Like looking at a photograph of a good memory, it'll make you feel good by sort of doubling or extending the good feelings you already have. And when you're in a bad way, it can remind you that there are ways to deal with these bad circumstances. Remember that you're like water. You might be forced low, but that doesn't mean that you're bad. It doesn't mean you lack power. Sometimes water is the most powerful thing, right? I think that's part of the value of philosophy. There's lots of ways you might get similar value. Maybe your friends hold you up when you're in a bad way. But isn't it a great idea to have something else, right? Another option? Okay. So this is part of the value, I think, of philosophy. Art can do this sometimes as well, and specifically the Tao Te Ching, the book we're reading now. Some of these things are so short and so deep that you could easily memorize them. And then you would have this memory, like a photograph of a good time. You would have this memorized in your head to help you deal with the bad times and help you enrich or understand the good times. That's pretty powerful, right? You've seen people post inspirational quotes online. This is like the deeper way to do inspirational quotes. Exposing yourself to great philosophy and then memorizing or sort of making permanent in yourself some of their best, most uplifting ideas. Okay? That's part of why later on we're going to have this practice of reading out loud passages from this book. Because when you read something out loud, it can sort of sink into you in a different way. You're more likely to remember it, and it's more likely to be a tool that you can use to improve your feelings or your behavior on your own terms. Okay? We're gonna stop the recording here, and then we're gonna talk a little more about ethics and Taoism coming up. But I want to leave this recording on this point, that these sort of inspirational quotes you can find within Taoism or within philosophy generally are supposed to be things you keep in your pocket for the rest of your life. You pull them out when you want to feel better, and they change your attitude. That's a very powerful function or value of philosophy. Okay, so I'm going to end this recording here and then go on to the next one, please.